In the United States, our neighborhoods have fewer true community gathering places than almost any other developed nation. We no longer live in villages built by the people for the people. Instead, we live in developments driven by the interests of bankers and developers, places designed to generate profit, not connection. But villages are different. They emerge from the shared effort of residents working together to meet their own needs, fostering belonging, participation, and well-being. This contrast reveals a vital lesson. When the spaces we live in are shaped by others, and we're made to feel powerless within them, the design itself is broken. Today, we're challenging that model. We're reimagining what it means to live, connect, and build together, even within the rigid grids that define so much of North America's landscape. We're engaging it with a villager sensibility, and we're asking ourselves, how can we unlock the creativity which is resident here all the time, and yet people don't tend to even speak to each other? It looks completely normal, and yet at the same time we don't quite tend to understand what we're seeing. Let's look at the facts. All of the houses tend to address the street across a space where all across the country people are told that they have no power. They have no ability to take the street and make it into a space that actually brings people together. That's a big issue. Also, though they might have back doors, back porches, back decks, and maybe even gardens, their separation is enforced by lines that say this is yours and this is mine. I'm actually not decrying the idea that people have separate interests. It's just that all across the country, quite unlike thousands upon thousands of years of village design, there's been no effort made to create something that they would steward in common. Retrofitting a neighborhood block like this to make it work like a village again consists of several different design patterns that characterize the most lovely and robust villages in the world. The first one being whether or not there's a great village commons where everyone knows that they belong. Such a space tends to exist in a central location between where everyone lives, so they all have an equal access to it. In fact, this would tend to straddle property lines and be something that brought people together across those lines. But this is the first piece. This is the most important piece of the village because it tells everyone that they're all part of a greater whole. Another one of the really significant design patterns that has to characterize a village is that when you come to the perimeter of the village, that there are portals, you might call them gateways or entrances, that celebrate your arrival and also your passage out of the village. They can be a lovely, arch with some grapes or kiwis arching overhead. Something that celebrates the fact that you're entering the perimeter, and it says welcome to you, and it also invites you to return as you leave. When people live in the colonial grid like we do, the pathways tend to be long and straight and flat. Americans have this challenge around obesity largely because their environments don't engage them to want to get out and move around. If your environment is repetitious and monotonous, it's not inviting to us to want to come outside and move around. But particularly because the environment, the experience of moving around is kind of almost all the same, and you're relying on the differences of architecture to make it more interesting. But when you don't even have places where people are outside interacting and gathering like you would in a good Spanish or Italian village, then why get off the couch? Why even go outside? You're not going to have a place, a destination. So what we're seeing now are pathways that link people from the gateways where they arrive in their block to the common center. So everyone is linked. Notice that these lines are not flat and straight, but they actually curve and they adjust as people are moving between things. And the pathway can be established through something as simple as wood chips. There's many different ways to create a sense of a path. Another thing to think about is connecting to people across public space. Typically in the USA, we're told that we don't have any power in the public right-of-way. I can assure you in Portland, Oregon, that is no longer the case. We now have the ability to transform street intersections into public squares for free, beginning by painting the streets. We can install benches and kiosks for free on our own authority in a collaborative set of agreements that we've created. Before 1920, when the federal government decided that streets were only for cars, for all the millennia of human existence, streets had multiple different kinds of uses that were enacted in that space every single day. And maybe the biggest and most important of all were the combined birthday parties of all the children that would live in an area of what we call a neighborhood. They would come out into the streets, and that was the space where children would play and they would be safe. There is a lot that's missing. Trees should have tree houses in them. Do you live in a neighborhood without a swing within a block of where every child lives? In my world, I would have a sitting bench at least within 50 feet of where everyone lives. So we have some examples of the kinds of things that would bring people together as a village. Like a community market, a tool-sharing library, sacred spaces, greenhouses, things like that. Benches everywhere all around the block. Why isn't there an art studio? Why isn't there a cafe? Why isn't there a place for a music venue? Why do you have to go to a music festival or place like Burning Man in order to find that kind of integration? And then you come home, save your money to want to go away again. Why don't we engage in this place and bring this rich program of the village back into our lives? So I just put down orange circles designating water catchment cisterns on the back corner of everyone's house because we want to catch water. So the reason we're having these cisterns happen is because we're going to put in a common watercourse that is yet another form of commons that will bring people's lives together. And all of their rooftops will be like hills and valleys where rain comes down from the high places and flows down to the low places. Except with these cisterns, we're going to intercept that water so that we can collect it and use it and then release it again, letting it eventually get back into the landscape so that it recharges the water table. I hope everyone is actually thrilled when you consider as you lay down these water courses that every time a pathway intersects with a water course, it becomes an opportunity for a bridge. Imagine walking curving pathways through an abundant landscape punctuated by bridges over water as you simply walk from your house to your friends. As opposed to having to go out your front door, walk a straight line, turn a 90-degree angle in order to come in through another front door just to visit someone on your block. Okay, so now I'm going to lay down some ponds. What if there were ponds on your block that were fed by the runoff from your rooftops so that at the top of your watercourse there was actually a place with a fountain where ducks would sometimes land and frogs and dragonflies loved to dwell? And as the water was flowing from that pond down toward the center, your gathering place would also have bodies of water along the edge, and perhaps those could reflect light at the end of the day as the sun was setting. And these are the kinds of things that villagers actually create for their own aesthetic legacy to leave to the future generations. Like, this is what Americans are missing out on when we just think of our homes as commodities that we liquidate, cash out, and move on from to somewhere that we hope will be better. When you're considering an urban agriculture strategy, some of the most important pieces are going to be perennial systems, oftentimes in the form of food forests. You're also going to be, at the same time as you're thinking about that layer, you're probably going to be thinking about supporting native species and then also annual agriculture that tends to require more sunlight, tomatoes and basil and artichokes, eggplant, corn. The abundance that is possible in places where we've just thought that we're going to grow lawns that we scarcely use becomes impossibly exciting. If we treat this side of the model as south, then I'm going to be placing these representations of annual gardens in light green on the south-facing available open spaces. I'm also going to be thinking of where the light is coming down both in the summertime and in the wintertime, because in the wintertime we're going to have much less available light. Where would those spots still be available where we could actually grow anything in the form of, say, a winter garden? So I'm going to locate these in open spaces in a neighborhood where people work. No one typically across the country has ever looked at the direction of the sun as it rises and as it sweeps across the landscape and as it goes down over the horizon at the end of the day to consider how sunlight actually falls upon the space. I'm not just talking about passive solar gain or photovoltaic solar panels or solar hot water. I'm talking about the whole sensibility around spaces and places that you'll find in villages across the world made by indigenous people. So say some friends here don't necessarily like to see each other all that often. One of the things you can consider is rather than having a fence, you could actually have a living edge with something like what we like to call a fedge or a food hedge. These can go kind of all over the place depending on the species that you're planting. So these food forests can freaking go everywhere. Another layer in the urban environment is animal husbandry. People love animals. Kids really thrive around animals and learning how to take responsibility. Taking care of animals is a great way to grow up a kid. Just to mention some of the potential animal species that can easily coexist with people even in the confines of a block like this. Piglets, goats, rabbits, chickens, ducks, other kinds of fowl, and that's just to get started. You can actually have bees as well in an urban environment. Now, when it comes to talking about energy, what we like to say is that before you start calculating how to create an alternative energy system, first you can engage strategies that reduce your load, that reduce your need. And so one of the most popular things that we've been doing on our block is actually to paint rooftops with reflective colors so that we immediately reduce our energy load for cooling by creating reflective surfaces. So you might have a south-facing greenhouse where you concentrate heat and then you might have a reflective roof. You could do this all over the block. Another strategy related to energy is the idea of installing a green roof. So on a slope and on a structural system that can handle an installation of an eco-roof, you could actually decide to create a living respirating surface like a green roof. Imagine that every single house could be generating its own power and then tied together in a resilient localized kind of network so that you always had enough. So imagine that every one of these homes could have a solar hot water system as well as solar electric. When we start to reconsider our lives at this scale, the greatest consequence of this is that our voice and our sense of capacity and power actually becomes limitless. And for an American, that is a big deal. To go from thinking that we are just a consumer or we are just a job description or we are just what we have in our bank account to feeling like you can do anything, then you start to do stuff like this. Why not curve the pathways of our lives into something more aesthetic and beautiful that still enables us to have driveways and to come home, but that starts to fill in the surfaces of the grid so that that arable land becomes available to us to grow and create. It becomes more beautiful and interesting for our gathering needs, and at the same time we no longer just travel long straight flat lines for the rest of our lives. And even more than that, considering the fact that where intersections happen, the pathways of our lives come together, that is the most essential pattern of the public gathering place in the history of villages in all the world. So every one of these nodes should be places of community convergence. Imagine a village that grows outward, not just in size, but in spirit, connecting every layer of community as we begin to transform the world itself. Picture pathways that curve with intention, dotted with places to rest, recharge, and reconnect. Maybe there are stations for electric vehicles, spaces for community bikes, shaded areas for gathering, or quiet corners for reflection and ceremony. Now imagine walking through your neighborhood and seeing food growing all along your path. Fruit trees, herbs, vegetables within reach of you and your children. Would food insecurity still exist in a world like that? Because at its heart, this isn't just about design or infrastructure. It's about people reclaiming their agency, realizing that everything around us can be reimagined. What we once thought was ordinary or fixed might actually be the canvas for rediscovering something ancient and profound, the village that still lives within each of us.